All right, I guess I'm ready to start here. So it's great to see everybody, especially after the last couple of years. Actually good to be at a conference where you get to see people in person. So thank you all for being here. I don't know how much people know about Salem Media Group and what we do, so hopefully this presentation will be informative for you to understand Salem and kind of the uniqueness. We are a pretty unique company. We're the market leader in Christian and conservative media and lots of different media, you know, multimedia company where we have different platforms, and I'll get into a lot of this in a little bit more detail as I go through it. One of our media platforms is digital. It's been growing quite rapidly, 17% over the last 3 years. One of the more interesting things about Salem is we actually have a block programming revenue stream, which is, I would say, really unique to Salem. Unique as far as there's really no one else in the radio industry that does what we do in large markets. And it really makes it recession resilient. I mean, even in tough times, we're still able to either stay flat or grow that business. And again, I'll talk about that in more detail in a bit. We've diversified our revenue stream. I've been with the company over 20 years. And when I started, we were basically a radio-only company for the most part. But now 29% of our revenue is digital, another 29% is broadcast advertising, 28% is that recession-resilient block programming, and 10% book publishing. And for those of you who don't know much about radio, which is one of our biggest platforms, it generates a lot of free cash flow. And we have some pretty good valuation metrics. Our free cash flow yield is 14.3%. And our EBITDA multiple is sitting at 6.8. So let me go into each of kind of our larger media platforms. So radio broadcasting, we have 101 radio stations throughout the country, mostly in large markets. We also have a network where we have about 3,200 affiliates that take some form of our content and our programming. I mentioned the block programming business, that's very stable. We are the largest commercial Christian radio broadcaster in America, and we're the largest news talk radio broadcaster in the top 25 markets when you look at it by station count. And one thing, I hear a lot is, well, is radio dead? Because some people just don't listen to radio as much, or they think it's dying. It still reaches 238 million Americans. 88% of America listens to radio on a weekly basis. And I've been with the company, like I said, over 20 years, and that number's always been in the low 90s. It did dip below 90 since the pandemic, but still a lot of America listens to radio, and it's still a very vibrant medium. Mentioned digital. We have our websites and apps get about 170 million monthly page views. We have a local multimedia advertising agency in all of the markets that we operate called Salem Surround. We now have a podcast network that we started January 1st of 21. We have Salem Now, which is a transactional video on demand platform. And we recently launched the Salem News channel, which is an OTT news channel, which is basically most of our radio personalities with the TV with the camera in the studio, but we do have one TV only hour, and we're looking to expand that. And then finally, book publishing. We publish Christian and conservative books because kind of everything we do goes after those two audiences. Some recent authors have included Dinesh D'Souza, Ted Cruz, Sebastian Gorka, David Limbaugh, and others. I mentioned we really go after two audiences, the Christian and conservative audience. And, when I was a kid, my grandfather would say there's two things you don't want to talk about, and that's religion and politics, because that's how people identify themselves. But here I talk about religion and politics every day, but because of that, we're able to cross-promote in a way different than if we were running adult contemporary stations or country music stations. We can really drive radio listeners to our websites. We can do radio interviews with authors. So if Molly Hemingway has a new book coming out, we can drive book sales by interviewing them. We'll do on-site events for our radio stations where we can promote books. We can promote some of our e-commerce. Just a lot of different ways to grow our business and move audience from one media to the other. And then from a sales perspective, we have kind of a 360-degree selling to our advertisers because I can sell them more than just radio. I can sell them other things as well. And here's a quick look at the revenue breakdown. I already mentioned 29% digital, 29% broadcast advertising, 28% block programming. book publishing 10%, and 4% other. And digital is the fastest growing segment. You know, that should get above 30% here pretty soon. This is the last 3 years of digital. I mentioned 17% annual growth rate over the last 3 years. It's now $75 million. Now let me just talk about each of the segments in a little bit more specificity and detail. I did say we're the third largest operator in the top 25 markets. 62 of our stations are in 21 of the top 25 markets. And that's important. That's where half of the adults in America live, in the top 25 markets. Therefore, you can get higher revenues, higher margins for being in the top 25 markets. And that's where our customers want to reach America. They want to have an impact, and they want to impact the culture. You do that in the largest markets. The only two broadcasters bigger than us in the top 25 markets are iHeart and Odyssey. So we're pretty big in those large markets. Let me talk about our segments, our formats within radio broadcasting. The first one is what's really unique. That's the Christian teaching and talk, and that's what really has the block programming on there. So, you know, I mentioned this resilient block programming. What is it? Well, if you were to tune into KKLA in Los Angeles, 99.5 FM, probably one of the premier signals in Los Angeles. A typical hour will have two block programmers that are, you know, one's buying the time from 8 to 8:25, the other from 8:30 to 8:55. We then have, you know, 5 minutes every half hour for local news, traffic, weather, ads, things like that. But during that block program time, they're paying me to be on the air, and you'll see logos in the bottom right there of some of our largest ministries. Folks like Focus on the Family, In Touch Ministries. At the end of their program, they're saying, hey, we're listener supported. Please send money to P.O. Box, whatever. If you like today's message, we have a companion workbook available for a donation of any amount. What they're doing is they're building a donor base and a listener base over time. So if a new ministry starts in a station, you know, in a time slot, let's say at 8 a.m., it's going to take them 2 to 3 years to break even. In other words, every month they're paying me more than what they're bringing in the way of donations and product sales. But that's going to, you know, that deficit's going to narrow over time. By about year 2 or 3, they get to break even. Another couple of years after that, they go ahead and they hit break even, and it becomes an annuity. Such to the point that these top 10 ministries have been on the air with us for an average of 33 years. You just don't see them leave. During the Great Recession, very little turnover. During the pandemic, very little turnover. So it's very unique, and there's no one else in the large markets that are doing this. So if Turning Point wants to you know, reach people in Southern California, they really have to come to us in either San Diego or Los Angeles. Again, very unique about Salem. You just don't see others doing it. By the way, we push rates with our national ministries every January 1st, usually 2 to 3.5% rate increases. 95+% renew every year. Now this next year, we've talked about how there's this increase in demand. We're having more ministries wanting to expand their operations and a few new ministries. We're saying that we expect this recession-resilient block programming that's usually 2 to 3.5% is going to grow somewhere in the neighborhood of 8% this year. So we're pretty excited about that. This makes up almost half of our radio revenue, and I already mentioned 28% of our total revenue. Let me go back. 2 other formats, contemporary Christian music, most of them known as The Fish. They're just like a regular adult contemporary station that you would hear. They make money just on commercial time. We use the moniker Safe for the Whole Family on those stations because you don't have to worry about what the jock is going to say coming out of a commercial break. The lyrics on the stations are a little bit different, but it's all about, you know, it operates just like any other radio station. It's about 22% of our radio revenue. And in some markets, by the way, we could be, you know, top 5 rated station in the entire market. So these are really well-performing radio stations, in particular in Dallas and Atlanta is where we tend to do best in this format. Then we have 31 stations that do news talk, probably better labeled as conservative news talk. Again, Christian audience and conservative audience. Most of the stations that do conservative talk are programmed with some nationally syndicated talent that we syndicate. So you'll see there are 7 figures, 6 of them, Hugh Hewitt, Mike Gallagher, Dennis Prager, Charlie Kirk, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, and Carl Jackson all do 3-hour conservative talk shows. So if you think about it, I have a talk station in New York. There's 18 hours of programming for that station right there. I know in New York we happen to have Joe Piscopo does a local morning show, and in a couple of other markets we do some local shows as well, but it makes it really easy financially to get another news talk station because I've already got most of the broadcast day programmed. But the key in the syndication business is getting more affiliates. The way you sell it is the more affiliates you have, and in the larger markets, that means you have a larger audience. If someone takes, the Mike Gallagher show, which, Mike's going to be speaking at this conference here at 5 o'clock a little bit later. If someone wants the Mike Gallagher show, he can be on in Des Moines, Iowa. We don't have a station there, and they take the station for free. But I get 5 minutes an hour of commercial time that he has to air, the operator of the station in Des Moines. And the more affiliates I have, the larger audience, the larger I can charge for that time. And so, you've got Hugh Hewitt's up to 480 affiliates. It wasn't that long ago he was down in the 200s. I remember before the 2016 elections where he was moderating some of the primaries. All of a sudden, his prominence, and quite honestly the prominence of a lot of our talent, has really risen. The last guy in there, Eric Metaxas, does a 2-hour show on Christian stations. But in addition to long form, we also have news programs that we put together. It's expensive to have a high quality news program. So we have SRN News, about 1,600 stations take that programming. Town Hall News, almost 900. SRN is geared more towards Christian stations, Town Hall more just towards conservative stations, and we'll be able to put a 60-second commercial at the end of that we get to air and charge for. And then Salem Music Network is basically today's Christian music or contemporary Christian music that 200 stations across America take that. Let me now switch over to digital and kind of all the different tentacles we have on digital. So we have a lot of national websites, both Christian and conservative websites. So we have, Bible study tools. We have Christianity.com, Crosswalk.com. Those are websites and apps that go after the Christian audience. On the conservative side, we have Town Hall and Red State and PJ Media and Twitchy. And I mentioned the ability to cross-promote. When we bought Town Hall, for example, it was doing 12 million monthly page views. And the next month, it was doing 25 million monthly page views. Not because we could operate it better, but then I could take a guy like Hugh Hewitt and say, hey, if you want a full text, let's say today he was saying, if you want a full text of what President Biden said about Ukraine, go to townhall.com. Or there's a great blog on Hot Air about inflation, right? So we're driving people to our website. So we went from 12 million to 25 million page views literally, one day or 1 month after the next. So that's what I mean by the ability to cross-promote. Then we also have e-commerce going after the church for the most part. Worship House Media sells videos that churches may show, after a time of worship before the pastor comes up. We have other things like church staffing and children's ministry deals. Again, e-commerce is mostly geared towards the church. Then all of our local radio stations, they have websites, they stream, so there's clearly some revenue there. And we kind of look at it and say, our audience wants to come to us, and so if you want to listen on terrestrial radio, great. But we're on all the aggregators like iHeart and TuneIn and Amazon Alexa, so you can get all of our stations however the ultimate end user wants to get it. Then in an acquisition that we had in 2014, we ended up with some financial newsletters. We continue that business. We've actually added to it, and it's done quite well for us as well. Just there's a nice little overlap with the conservative audience and those interested in investing. Now I want to spend a little bit of time on some of our newer digital initiatives. I've already mentioned some of these by name, but Salem Surround is a full-service multimedia advertising agency. It's in all of the markets that we operate. So now instead of just selling radio, I can sell someone a social media campaign. I can sell them display ads. I can redesign websites. I can do live chat. Just a lot of different things. I can sell email. So that's what Salem Surround is, and that's grown quite nicely for us. We think it's, digital plus radio gets you better results than just either one by themselves. Then Salem Now, we launched that during the pandemic with a movie called No Safe Spaces with Adam Carolla and Dennis Prager. And then since then, it's been a nice home for a lot of conservative and Christian films where they can't maybe get distribution. And so, we've been able to have a kind of a revenue share on this transactional video on demand platform. We had a movie a year ago called Uncle Tom. Uncle Tom 2 is coming out in June. What we're probably most excited about is a movie called 2,000 Mules that comes out next month, May 2nd and May 4th. It'll actually be in theaters. We're the executive producer of the film and put some money in marketing it as well, so it'll be in theaters for a couple days and then on our platform, and it has to do with the 2016 election. As a matter of fact, there's a red carpet event at Mar-a-Lago the week after next, so we think the former president's going to be behind it, which should help fuel that revenue on that as well. We also launched the Salem Podcast Network in the beginning of 21 with Dinesh D'Souza was really the sole podcast that we started with. We've since added other talent like Charlie Kirk and Todd Starnes and Jenna Ellis and Trish Regan, and we continue to look for other people to add to our podcast network. And then more recently, we've done sort of a soft launch of the Salem News Channel, which I mentioned is where we have cameras in our studios, and someone can just watch that on an OTT basis. Here's a chart of how digital revenue has grown over that time period. You can see the bottom blue is just our owned and operated websites. The lighter blue is the e-commerce, but you'll see some of the newer initiatives. Salem Surround is that kind of yellowish color. And Salem Podcast Network went from 0 in 20 because it didn't exist. In 21, when we launched it, it grew to $6.4 million. So we've been pretty happy with the success there. And kind of the last piece of media that we're in, I mentioned, was publishing. We used to have a couple magazines. We've sold those. You'll still see a little bit of revenue there, but it's really two aspects of publishing. Traditional publishing books you'll see at Barnes & Noble and Target and Costco, and then self-publishing as well. So Regnery Publishing is what we bought in 2014. That was our first foray into traditional book publishing. We had a book that came out yesterday. It's the first book on Zelensky. It was just released yesterday, so we're pretty excited about the timing of that. Obviously not excited about what's going on, but about the timing of that. Eric Metaxas has a book out, Is Atheism Dead? We wrote a book a year ago, Putin's Playbook, which is eerily familiar with what's been going on. But anyway, so that's just kind of your traditional book publisher. Because of the relationships we have with a lot of the Christian thought leaders, we created a new imprint called Salem Books, because we have relationships with people like Greg Laurie, who's a well-known pastor who writes books. He's done a couple of books with us now, and there's a little bit more of an evergreen nature of a Christian book versus, a political book will sell great for a little while and then it'll stop. The Christian books sell a little bit more, into perpetuity. In addition, we do some self-publishing, like the book in the middle at the bottom. There's a pastor who wrote a book after he walked from California to New York, wrote about his experience, and he wanted to have the book available to his congregation. And so literally if you went on to Amazon and found that book, the publisher would print, because we're not the printer, they'd print one copy and just send it. So there's no inventory risk on the self-publishing. Kind of a quick financial overview and a couple of key metrics. In our space, in the broadcast space, which is our biggest media, everyone's been talking about trying to get back to pre-pandemic levels. Can we get back to 2019? Well, we did. In 21, total revenue was 2% above pre-pandemic levels. Adjusted EBITDA was 4% above pre-pandemic levels, and cash flow was about flat. And that's because, during the pandemic, some of those CapEx things just got delayed, and so 21 had a little bit more in CapEx, a little elevated. But we're back above pre-pandemic levels, and to me, that's very encouraging, as others are still trying to get there. A couple other notes. We have $98 million in federal NOLs, so we're not going to be a meaningful taxpayer for quite some time. I always keep working with my tax director to try to push that out. My goal is to retire before we ever have to pay some meaningful federal taxes. And then, I had earlier mentioned that we had a free cash flow yield of 14%. We had 46 cents per share, or $12.5 million last year in free cash flow. Last year in September, we extended the maturities. We did an exchange of most of our debt. 52% of our debt went from 6.75% notes to 7 1/8% notes, moved the maturity from 24 to 28. In this interest rate environment, we feel very happy about that timing and getting that done with just a small increase in coupon. And we've been very focused on debt reduction. We had a few big events in 2021 that gave us a lot of cash to be able to focus on paying down debt. We did get $11.2 million in PPP loans. All but $20,000 was forgiven, so we were able to use that to pay down debt. We also sold a piece of land in Dallas for $12.1 million. We had 43 acres. We kept 9 acres. We sold 34 of them, moving our towers to the remaining 9 acres. Still able to reach the same audience and, unlock $12 million of capital. We sold some land in Tampa, $13.5 million. We're going to move the transmitter and diplex somewhere else. So again, able to really keep our cash flow, but sell some of the land. And then we sold in the first quarter of 22, $2.5 million of land in Phoenix, and we have a land sale in Denver that should close sometime this quarter in the second quarter. And if you look, our leverage was up in the 8s. It was actually close to 9 as the pandemic started. Now we're under 4.5. So we're really pleased where we are from a leverage perspective, but we want to see that go lower. Our goal is to really see a leverage that starts with a 3, something under 4. Quick look at our management team. Normally I just blow right through this, but there's been a change in our management team. Our 2 founders, Stuart recently went off the board and is chairman emeritus. His son is now on the board, Stuart Jr. Edward Atzinger is no longer CEO. He's executive chairman of the board. Dave Santrella, who was president of broadcast, is now CEO. David Evans, who was president of digital and publishing, is COO. But if you look at our executive team, we've all worked together, 21, 22 years. So a pretty deep executive team there. And here's just a quick summary of the highlights again, and I'll just leave it here and open the floor for any questions that anyone has. Yes, sir.
What's your, where do you growing about 10% a year, is that what it is?
10%, we haven't been growing that fast. I mean, maybe coming out of the pandemic we did, but it really depends. Like digital's been growing 17% a year. I'd say traditional radio's been a little bit more flat. Block programming has been growing in the low single digits. So it kind of varies by division or by segment.
Are you doing, is there anything on the, you're looking at other ways to increase the growth rates?
Yeah, the question was, are we looking at other things to increase the growth rate? Absolutely. I mean, so we're focused very much on digital because we think, that's clearly where the future is. And we look at where's the audience going. So we're looking at all different ways to reach our audience. That's why we're getting involved in this film, 2,000 Mules. That's why we launched the Salem Podcast Network that went from 0 in 20 to 6.4 million in 21. So we're going to continue to look to see what our audience, the audience that's interested in Christian and conservative content, whatever those 2 audiences are doing, we're going to meet them there and find ways to deliver them content and grow revenue that way. Yes, in the back?
Along the lines of the iHeart involvement in events, are you looking at getting involved in Christian events?
Yeah, the question was, are we getting involved and looking to get involved in Christian and I would say in conservative events? The answer is yes, and we used to do a lot of that before the pandemic. Obviously that evaporated. We would do a lot of Christian concerts called Fish Fest or Celebrate Freedom in Dallas, and we'll do news talk events at like the Reagan Library. I just know that one because it happens to be close to my home. And we'll have, maybe one of our authors come in and speak at an event, and we're able to drive book sales. But yes, we very much do a lot of events. The other thing that we've done, haven't been able to do in the last couple of years, is we'll do listener trips to like Israel. We'll take 600 listeners to Israel, or we've taken them on a Footsteps of the Apostles cruise. And so we'll very much want to continue doing those events, and we think the environment is such that we're going to be able to start doing more of those again. It is a great revenue source. Yeah, Barry? Correct. Yeah, well, certainly with the economic cycle and I would say even the geopolitical cycle, I think that's increasing demand for our content. Not only just our talk show hosts, because people want to know, okay, what does someone like Hugh Hewitt think about what's happening in Ukraine, or what's Dennis Prager say about inflation? But then people are going to our websites too, like Town Hall and Red State. So that's all helpful. And then you've got, political. You've got an election year, and for those of you that don't know, I mean, radio and I would say other media, digital, TV, do very well during election years because you've got candidates and issues who are spending money, who want to get their constituency to vote or want to convince people to vote a certain way. And I got to tell you, when I started the company 22 years ago, I thought, who would spend money on these stations politically? Everyone's probably pretty well decided. But, last year was our best, I'm sorry, we're in 22 now, but in last election cycle was our best political year ever. We got $6.6 million. It's about telling people what's at stake and getting them to vote. So every midterm the last few years has been bigger than the previous midterm. The last presidential cycle was bigger than the years before. So we feel pretty good about the upcoming midterms, and I've been given the hook. So I appreciate you guys being here and listening to the presentation. Thank you.